Thank you, Alyssa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Culbertson. I'm a principal with MSW Consultants. I appreciate the introduction. I will make a couple, just two quick points to further the introduction to put a little context into why I'm here. Oh, thank you. Technical difficulties, working on that, almost ready. And are we good? Super. So thank you for being here. Just to give you a little bit of background about why I'm presenting to you, MSW Consultants, we are a management consulting company who serve public sector waste management entities across the country. So we work for cities, counties, solid waste authorities, and state agencies. And our staff consists of folks who have extensive experience in the waste and recycling and organics management industry. I think that's important to point out. For what it's worth, we take very seriously that we want to be independent for our clients, and we don't work for public entities. We don't work for technology companies. We also are not an engineering company, so we're not performing advisory work to lead into engineering work. So I hope you don't mind my taking a moment to provide that perspective. So this was a very interesting, complex, far-ranging project. We have a lot to cover today. I'm going to try to get through it, and you'll probably learn fairly soon that I'm not a slide reader. Many of the slides will have more information. Those of you that like to review the words, hopefully you'll have time to do so. I look at my role, hopefully, as hitting the highlights for everybody on kind of how to think about the different options that came up. And the last point I'll make before I launch is that MSW Consultants, we were not hired to offer an opinion on the best course of action for Ontario County. We were hired to provide information so that your elected officials and your communities and you as individuals and businesses have reliable, helpful data to make good value judgments on the direction that you want to go with materials management in Ontario County. So my goal in this presentation will be to hopefully highlight some of the important data and how to think about it, but really it's to leave you with the opportunity to have constructive dialogues and make good decisions going forward. So getting right into it, I am going to see, I might ask a quick technical adjustment to see if I can move this little window somewhere else. Aha. Oh, hide meeting control. Oh, perfect. Great. Thank you. Now 100% ready to roll. So just some quick opening statements. In fact, this presentation is blocked into different different topics. And the first number of slides I have are intended to give some perspective on the Ontario County landfill. And so the slides that I have here to start out are intended to be very factual in nature, to paint a little bit of a picture of what we're all dealing with. So the Ontario County landfill, Ontario County has been contracted with a private operator since 2004. And in that time, all of Ontario County's waste, roughly, rounding up 100,000, currently 100,000 tons a year, but including not just your household trash and commercial trash, but including construction and demolition debris, which is C&D. Forgive me for the acronyms here you might be reading, but also industrial waste, biosolids, asbestos, other wastes, have all had a home conveniently and locally in the Ontario County landfill. Along with the landfill, the operator of the landfill also operates a material recovery facility, which is the acronym MRF that you see. That is the recycling plant that receives mixed recyclables and sorts those and sells the commodities back to market. So all of, or most of the county's 7,300 tons of recycling go to that facility. And essentially, even though, as was mentioned in the introduction, the current permit and the current lease agreement with your operator is scheduled to end in roughly 2028, this landfill has offered quite favorable disposal economics. I'm strictly speaking in dollars and cents. We're going to get into some of the not so great outcomes of the landfill, but from an economic standpoint, the current private operator has been able to offer low rates for waste disposal here in Ontario County. So what am I doing wrong? Let's bring that. Okay, too far. So I've got a few slides to talk a little bit about the Ontario County landfill in the context of the broader waste disposal market. It turns out that while this facility is obviously very local here, it serves a broad area and frankly has grown up with the solid waste industry. And so what you're looking at here is a map that highlights counties in New York State as well as other states that are exporting their wastes, and those wastes are coming to Ontario County. And I think what this shows and what people should take away from this is that the county landfill has been part of a regional disposal strategy by the landfill operator, and it's been very successful at attracting waste from across the state and even across the Northeast region. The next takeaway that it's important, I think, for folks to understand is because of the way our state and country and other states regulate waste management. Wastes travel over state lines. And if you look around the Northeast, disposal capacity is scarce and shrinking. Looking to the east into New England and the mid-Atlantic states, we're essentially almost out of landfill space. And that means wastes are going to continue flowing into New York State and even beyond. And you can see that as you go further out, additional wastes are flowing. So it's an industry where movement of waste is a fact of life. So, okay, I'm not going to read this slide for everybody, but I think it's important that you have a little bit of background on that this is a substantial landfill currently. The current operator is operating it as a large regional facility. It's visible to everybody. Those of you on the call, I'm sure, have had your view of the facility in terms of its elevation. It's taking 700,000 and maybe 750,000 tons a year of waste, most of which is being imported. It's treating leachate, which is the rainwater and other liquids that come through it. And of some interest, so all of these kind of waste statistics, on a financial side, the lease agreement has provided a significant financial benefit to the county to the tune of roughly $6.7 million a year. And so again, this slide, as mentioned, is simply here to provide facts that can be verified, that just give some perspective on what this facility means, both operationally and economically and environmentally in the county, because again, our role is to give clear-eyed facts about the situation and do our best to provide thoughtful decision-making data. So in the spirit of being clear-eyed, we understand and completely acknowledge that the town of Seneca has frankly the greatest impact of the facility and has taken steps to survey residents, and we are aware that the board passed a resolution in 2022 unanimously voting to close the landfill. So again, if we are giving fair treatment to this issue, it is critical that we fearlessly post all sides of the story and that we provide as much information as we can so that the Ontario County community has the ability to debate this and be constructive in the effort. I do want to bring in some state level policy. New York State has actually been a leader from a state level in establishing a solid waste management planning concept that is moving from a linear to a circular economy. I would not be a waste and recycling consultant if I didn't believe strongly in sustainability and capturing end-of-life materials to recycle and reuse them and put nutrients back in the soil and put commodities back into the stream of commerce. And so this is very near and dear to us, I think, professionally and personally at MSW Consultants. And so there certainly are opportunities to do that as we go through the presentation. We'll talk a little more about some of the challenges and some of the market constraints to going fully circular. But I think it's important that we want to acknowledge that. I'm now going to switch over to the material recovery facility, the MRF, the recycling facility. Similar to the landfill, Ontario County's recycling facility also imports a lot of mixed recyclables from around New York State. And so this, I think the highlight is the company that is operating these facilities is using the facilities to run, an effective vertically integrated business over a wide region. And in so doing, has been able to bring, again, financial benefits to Ontario County to do so. But I always like to use maps because I think it just gives gives a real understanding that this is a very regional facility, and so I want to make sure that comes through. Okay, in 2022, Ontario County conducted a waste characterization study. That was a study of the municipal solid waste, so essentially the residential and commercially generated trash within Ontario County that was going to the landfill. And this pie chart, I think, has two key takeaways, and it's sort of a glass half full, glass half empty concept. On one side, there are, if you look at the green pie pieces, there are a lot of opportunities potentially to shift recyclables and organics out of the landfill stream. So that's sort of, hey, that's some opportunity. On the other side, what we found is there also is a quite significant, almost 44% of materials that really do not currently have any kind of a market for diversion or recycling or recovery. And so I think this really shows that, yes, should recycling and diversion continue to be a high priority? Absolutely. But I think it also shows the reality, and I believe this is consistent with waste characterization studies that we've conducted across the country, that there is a lot of material that is not readily divertible and recoverable. So I think, again, just trying to provide a clear-eyed view of the situation. So I will not read the research summary task to you other than to say this was quite a comprehensive effort. We did break it into phases going forward. And so this presentation hopefully will highlight the key findings and hopefully create some basis for conversation, and hopefully maybe everybody learns a little bit of detail that they didn't know before. So, all right. So having gone through a little bit of framing slides just to give some background, from here forward, I've got information blocked off that we kind of tried to bucket this up in a way that we could hit key topics, hopefully stay organized, hopefully hit the high points. And so my first topic that I want to touch on for everybody that again, we were asked by the Board of Supervisors to look at a wide range of alternatives associated with disposal. And so I'm going to start with one possibility would be to develop new facilities. In other words, the Ontario County landfill closes as scheduled. So let's develop a new facility of some sort. And in particular, for waste, which is far and away the largest tonnage that Ontario County needs to manage, we evaluated for this project developing a new waste to energy facility. So you might see the acronym WTE in future slides, or developing a new landfill in some other location in the county. So maybe shifting it to some other geography. And I'm going to go through what we learned because I think it's pretty straightforward. It turns out that both federal regulations and state of New York regulations apply a great many constraints to siting new solid waste facilities. And in particular, for both landfills and waste to energy facilities, the prevalence of groundwater or water sources, proximity to certain types of businesses or institutions, such as airports or schools. There are quite a number of things that limit the development of where you could put a new facility. And so we have a report that has quite extensive detail, but this map shows that in Ontario County, simply from regulatory constraints, only the western portion of the county would be eligible for siting of a new facility. And so that is, I guess the upside is there's opportunity. Downside is strictly regulatory constraints limit the location. And if you didn't blink, you just saw the map change to the same looking map, but we did the same regulatory review of siting a new landfill. And whereas we had a big yellow spot, I'll jump back real quick, we had the west side of the county for waste energy, kind of a larger area. On this landfill slide, it's only the blue highlights that would potentially be acceptable for a new landfill development. So even less availability for landfill. And again, all of these limitations are imposed by federal and state regulations limiting the siting of these new facilities. So having looked at the regulatory constraints, when it comes to new waste to energy plants and new landfills, I think it's important that everybody knows those are very expensive facilities. Waste energy facilities, we haven't seen a new waste energy facility built from scratch in this country since the 1990s. We have seen some expansions of existing facilities. We are talking hundreds of millions of dollars to permit and build a waste energy facility, and at least tens of millions of dollars for landfills. So these are large capital projects that take a long time to develop and permit. And candidly, there are quite a number of business risks that need to be mitigated in order for these facilities to be viable within the market. Whether it's waste energy, dealing with ash, dealing with environmental pollution issues, changes in law. So essentially, as we looked at new facilities, we, the consultant, have concluded, and we think it's fair to make the statement that it is very unlikely that a new large-scale solid waste facility would be siteable, permittable, and able to be constructed in Ontario County. So, in addition to kind of large-scale waste disposal facilities, we recognize that there are other smaller facilities that might be able to process certain aspects of the waste stream. We know that from the waste characterization study that we've got, over 10,000 and probably even more tons, 10,000 tons, 11,000 tons of food scraps, as well as yard scraps, green waste, prunings, grass, leaves, that sort of thing, that could be diverted to organics processing. I'm not going to go into details on this presentation, but we looked in our report at the anaerobic digestion technology, which could be something that could be built potentially on the county landfill parcel. We also looked at development of a commercial composting operation. So two technologies for processing and recovering nutrients from organic material. And along with that, we also evaluated relying and leveraging on some regional facilities that are already in other surrounding counties that can take food waste and yard waste. I think the main takeaway for those of you listening in, are those good options to recycle and reduce waste? Absolutely. But it's very difficult to separate, collect, and deliver that material. And it's really still a very small portion of the county's total waste stream. So not something you could do a wholesale conversion to for future waste management. And then the final comment I'll make on the notion of sort of new facility opportunities. Again, I won't go into detail, but those of you who are interested, we are aware and believe there could be value-adding opportunities at the landfill site to develop some alternative power, solar and wind, and possibly some battery energy storage. And so again, these are many small strategies that collectively may be applied in Ontario County going forward for environmental, economic, and materials management reasons. All right, so that was kind of the easy information block because it was new facilities. I'm going to get into one that I suspect everybody's quite interested in, is that we were asked to look very closely at alternatives to expand the county landfill. So let me talk a little bit, though, about, well, I'll lay out what expansion means because that is important. So the landfill is permitted to close in 2028. And we also believe that it will be essentially filled 100% to the permitted capacity by 2028. However, it is quite common in our industry for landfill owners to seek and obtain permits for expansion of their landfills. There are two options when you're expanding a landfill. You can keep going up higher, so that would be a vertical expansion, or you could start going sideways and filling in parts of the parcel with waste going sideways, which would not increase the elevation. So I'm just going to touch real quick on a little bit about what those look like. So we engaged a solid waste engineer to look at the drawings of the landfill and to use their expertise to project available capacity and to sort of draw out what it would look like to do a vertical and a lateral expansion. So this slide that you're looking at, if you'll note, there's a little bit darker sort of concentric circles in the middle of this shape, and so that essentially is indicative of continuing to put more waste on top of the already filled and soon to be full cells, which is sort of the larger circle of larger concentric circles. And so that would be the option to go vertically. Key takeaways for folks on this call, on this web call, The vertical expansion option offers quite a bit of additional capacity, 5.9 million tons. And so that's important because if you're going to make a decision as meaningful as expanding a landfill, you don't want to have to do that in 2 years when it fills up again. So the vertical expansion offers a lot of opportunity to keep the facility open longer if that is a judgment call that Ontario County might make. The other, I think, key takeaway is that a vertical expansion will not require new liners to be developed. It will leverage existing leachate treatment, which is the management of the water that goes through the landfill, and it will leverage existing landfill gas capture systems. It's a little bit less expensive typically because it's leveraging already built landfill infrastructure. So I think folks, for those of you that like these technical details, want to mention some of those. So the other alternative to expand the landfill in Ontario County would be to go laterally or horizontally. Similarly, we asked our solid waste engineer to look at the site plan, to look at the waterways, the wetlands, look at the landfill expansion regulations. And there is a little bit of capacity to expand laterally. The upside of that is that it would not increase the elevation of the current landfill. It would not make it go any taller. And I think that's a plus. I think we all, would agree that driving past the landfill and looking up at it, you'd rather not look at a big landfill pile. So the horizontal option would not build it higher. However, what we and our engineer identified is that the lateral expansion is much more limited in adding capacity to the landfill. So less than 1 million tons, which is, again, on some level, a lot. We'll have a slide coming up here that shows you what that means in terms of years of life. But another consideration, if you're trying to expand laterally and build a landfill over new acreage, you now have higher construction costs because you've got to build a new liner over that new acreage, and you have to build the new leachate collection system and extend your landfill gas capture system. And you also have now added additional long-term closure and long-term care obligations to an expansion that goes laterally. And so these are all complexities. I'm not looking to make everybody a landfill expert, but I think it's worth having some awareness of why you may go one direction or another. And this slide, this is a little bit of a tough one that I'm going to gloss over somewhat, but in addition to just the technical decisions to expand a landfill, you've got to permit that expansion, and that is a long-term process. We are talking multiple years. The potential for we're talking about the potential for delays. There is a back and forth process with the state regulatory entity, and so just the regulation alone is time-consuming and will have costs associated with it to follow all the steps. And on the right side of this slide, I mentioned the OMLA, which is the county's lease agreement. I don't have time to go into details on this call, but there are some legal issues in that contract that were the county to expand the landfill and begin to lay additional waste on the landfill after the current lease expires. There may be some issues that need to be delved into on a legal basis. So I think that's something the county understands and would be able to take forward. We can't know exactly how that would work out. But again, in having a clear-eyed view of the options, I think it's important that folks are just aware that, hey, these are issues that we need to keep working through depending on the direction Ontario County pursues. So with that as a background, let me just talk about landfill expansion, because I think it's really important that landfill expansion, that is not a it is black and white in the regard that the landfill stays open. But for those of you here in Ontario County who see the landfill and see the trucks coming in and out every day, and maybe see the birds who are feeling the landfill right now, I think it's important to know that you're feeling a large regional landfill receiving over 700,000 tons a year. And so we have kept that. We've kept that as a scenario. In other words, the status quo is a large regional waste importing landfill. So that's that top bullet. So we looked at what would it be like in Ontario County if we just kept doing what we're doing and have a lot of waste getting imported. But critically, we also took the total opposite approach because you don't have to keep doing what you're doing to have the landfill expand and serve your community. So the bottom bullet on this slide, we had the internal kind of conversation. Gee, what if we expanded the landfill, but really reserved it as a community resource for Ontario County waste from residents and households and sewage treatment plants and construction and demolition projects? And so that's the bottom bullet that we looked at. And roughly 100,000 tons a year are coming from Ontario County. So that's quite a large difference going from a regional waste importing facility over 700,000 tons a year and actually permitted up to 900, a little over 900,000 tons a year, down to, well, gee, that, let's look at this being more of a true community only resource. And that leaves me with the middle bullet, which is a kind of a middle ground, a 50% fill rate. But I think it's very important for those of you on the phone to recognize that in addition to the decision to expand the landfill is an equally critical decision to determine how your community wants to have that landfill operate for the benefit of Ontario County. So I think that's why we have these different scenarios. So I have a quick table. I'm not going to read it line to line, but I do want to call your attention to the landfill life column under the 100% fill part of the table, because this is, I think, key. If you expand the landfill, given the available capacity that could be realized, and Ontario County makes the judgment call, hey, we're going to go ahead and keep importing all of these wastes from around New York and even into Massachusetts, then the expanded landfill, you're going to get maybe another 9 years out of it, up to 2037. Actually, maybe even a little bit less. We've had some talks about fill rate and compaction. But in any case, let's look on the other side. If Ontario County opts to expand the landfill but limit the inflow only to county waste, suddenly you've got a landfill that may have 50 years of capacity. And so I think it's important for everybody listening to understand the trade-off between the faster you fill it, the shorter the life of your landfill, but the slower you fill your landfill, the longer you have it available for whoever's using it. And so I think that is an important part of the discussion, that's just an important concept for folks to have. So I'm going to take a breath, take a drink of water here. So having looked at what the expansion scenarios look like operationally and from a tonnage standpoint, well, everybody wants to know what it's going to cost. And so there's some very key points that I want to touch on here. So just very briefly, we tried to take multiple approaches to estimate likely landfill tipping fees under these different scenarios. And so we have data available on the current facility that we looked at. We looked at some case studies of other landfills that were being either expanded or built in New York State. And we also did just our own internal pro forma models. So those of you that want a lot of background, we've tried to be very transparent. And so our report includes all of the assumptions we used in this exercise. But the reason we did all these different methods of estimating costs is because it's a little tricky. There are so many variables that we can't just design exactly what each scenario is going to look like and give you a perfect cost, but we do feel like we can come up with ranges that are reasonable and defensible. And so this table that you're looking at here kind of shows the ranges of tip fee. And the key takeaway, I think actually, if I remember correctly, I've got this on my next slide. So I'm just going to go ahead to my next slide because, again, there are a lot more numbers on this table than I can talk about in the time we have allotted. Those of you that have time to come back and look at it, great. But the critical takeaway when it comes to the cost of landfill disposal is that the more waste, the bigger the landfill, the lower the disposal cost. And the smaller the landfill in terms of lower waste coming in, the higher the cost per ton. So there's this inverse relationship of size and inbound volume and the cost per ton. And what that means is landfills are a business that operate better on a higher scale, better at a lower unit cost on a higher scale. And so what this table shows is the tip fees are in the mid 40s. So that's the first row. We think that if Ontario County prioritizes low disposal cost, if that emerges as the most important thing, for example, then Ontario County might wish to consider expanding the landfill, but then filling it at that 100% rate, in other words, maintaining waste import, because that provides the best unit economics. Conversely, if having super low disposal cost isn't the top priority, but maybe having long-term secure disposal capacity for county waste generators, then the county might make the judgment call to look at expanding the landfill, but only allowing county waste to be deposited at the landfill. So that would have higher disposal costs, but it would essentially eliminate a lot of the side effects of having waste import from other counties on transfer trailers. And so we wanted to give you and the Board of Supervisors and all decision makers an understanding of these dynamics as you talk through what is the best solution. And so you can really, again, I won't read the table, but I think that's just such a critical dynamic to understand as you're looking at possible options going forward. The last comment that I wanted to make on the cost of the landfill, I may not have mentioned this at the outset, but Ontario County and some other folks within the county, there's about 6.7, I think it's $6.7 million of financial benefit that accrues to different stakeholders in Ontario County under the current lease agreement. And so again, just strictly financial. We have, as we look forward, well, I don't know that we have a perfect crystal ball, but we do follow the market for disposal and for recycling. I think it's worth pointing out that if the landfill, whether or not the landfill stays open, whether it's a lot of waste imported or not, we think that the free recycling arrangement that the county currently enjoys under its agreement, we think that's probably going to be certainly reduced and quite possibly eliminated. So I think that's just something to bear in mind, that recycles processing, which by the way, we're going to talk about a little bit later, will be market driven, and payments to the county are likely to be quite reduced. We do think that if the landfill is expanded, we think it is appropriate and customary in the industry that there would still be host community fees paid to the host community. And maybe even some other benefits, although it may not be the case that free disposal would continue to be secured. So again, we don't know exactly what the details of these terms are, but we think it's important to be aware that there will also be changes to the financial benefits that stem from the current arrangement that the county has with the processor. Okay, going pretty fast. I hope everybody's still with me. So the next block of information that I want to touch on would be things that might happen if the decision is made as a community that Ontario County no longer wants a landfill. Well, if you don't have a landfill in Ontario County, then you'll need to convert your system to one of a waste export system, which is frankly exactly what all those counties in the state of Massachusetts, they're all exporting their waste to Ontario County. Waste export systems are essentially the norm throughout much of the East Coast and Northeast. So the good news is these systems are quite well established, but that would be a big change in the way business is done in Ontario County. So how to export waste? There really are two scenarios. I'm just going to get right into the first scenario. If the landfill closes, right now, all of the county collection trucks, all the residential trucks, the commercial front load trucks collecting trash at shopping malls and offices and places around the county, they have a convenient location. They can drive to the Ontario County landfill. If that landfill closes, then to export waste most efficiently, a primary option under consideration would be to develop a large-scale commercial transfer station. So I've got a couple of pictures here that show what a transfer station is. Essentially, it's where your on-route collection trucks deliver their waste. It gets tipped out on a tip floor and consolidated into a large trailer. In fact, it's the large trailers you see coming into Ontario County. Those are all originating from transfer stations to the east. Ontario County, if it closes the landfill, one option would be to develop a transfer-based waste export system. You can see the transfer trailer down on the right. So that transfer station facility is going to cost money to build and operate. And so I'll just, in the interest of time, Um, while certainly it would be necessary to get specific design and engineering plans, we have used the expectation that it would cost about $20 per ton just to operate that facility, which would be annualized capital cost, operating expense. For the waste to come in the front door, tip on the floor, and get consolidated into the trailer, $20 a ton. Then, once that waste is loaded on a trailer, there is now also transportation cost that is going to vary based on the distance the transport is required. And so I just want folks to know that as we looked at the economics of waste export, we consider the transfer station costs separately from the transportation costs, but those are obviously the two key components. And so we do have there are other disposal facilities to choose from. So this map shows that we have, quite a number. You can get pretty far afield, even going down into Pennsylvania. And so, we need to, however, recognize that the further away these landfills are, the more expensive the transportation is. And we also have to realize that these landfills are going to charge their own tip fees on any inbound tonnage originating in Ontario County. And Ontario County won't have any control over those tip fees beyond kind of what the market pricing is. So I'm suggesting that there's a kind of a price increase. So we did not exhaustively research every landfill within that map, but we did look at a range of landfills that post their gate rates. It is completely valid to note that a gate rate, a published price in a landfill, is probably on the very high end. Long-term supply agreements often you can negotiate a lower disposal price. And so if Ontario County built a commercial transfer station and was transferring, 60 or 65,000 tons of material, that would give the county some leverage to negotiate perhaps a lower disposal price than what you show here. But you can see that Ontario County enjoys tip fees in the mid 40s per ton, and all of the reported gate rates that you now have to transfer and transport you're going to be paying more. So I think what you're seeing is the likelihood of increased expense. So when we do these analyses, we're very big on being transparent at publicizing our assumptions. And so this final table, again, I won't read it line by line, but I just want to point out that we looked at 3 specific landfills, and then we kind of looked at a generic further away landfill. There are a number of them that are a little bit further away. And when you add together the cost of the transfer station at $20 a ton, and you factor in the transportation cost, which increases with distance, and then you add in the disposal fee at that distant receiving landfill, you can see that instead of disposing in the mid 40s a ton, we're up, 86, even over $100 a ton for a waste export system. And again, are these dollars exactly right down to the penny? No, I'm not here to tell you that, but I think we feel very comfortable that the order of magnitude showing is reasonable for planning purposes and to consider what the likely impacts are. And these are the numbers that we've used to do some future analysis. Okay, so that brings me to waste export scenario number 2. If Ontario County closes the landfill, Ontario County may also decide, you know what, we're not going to have a commercial transfer station. And so in that case, it means all of the hauling entities, which is mostly private haulers that provide subscription service to residents and go collect dumpsters at businesses, but also City of Canandaigua and the Village of Victor have public collection. It means that all of those entities providing collection with their heavy duty, expensive to operate garbage trucks will now have to drive those trucks to the nearest disposal facility, which is a lot further away. And I think it's very critical that folks understand that the cost to drive a garbage truck a lot of miles is much higher than the cost to drive a transfer trailer a lot of miles. So that's one big impact, is it makes the collection system much more expensive. And I think the other impact is that effectively leaves Ontario County as having many very small municipalities and a number of small haulers who are very fragmented in their ability to deliver a lot of waste. That's going to dramatically reduce any pricing power that might be available to secure lower disposal rates. So under this scenario, where there is no central solid waste facility, essentially fragments the county into a lot of very small operators who are basically going to have to take whatever the market is offering at that time. And that can be a little bit daunting in some regards. I think it's important for folks to understand that. So anyway, direct haul of waste, you can see these are some different trucks. A rear load truck collecting from households, or a front load truck on the bottom left, or even a roll off truck collecting from a construction site. You probably see construction boxes, at places where there's doing renovation or construction or even demolition. So these trucks, which are very expensive, now have to drive much further to distant landfills. And so that's going to dramatically change the collection economics in Ontario County if the landfill closes and if there's no transfer station. And so let's talk about, what does that do to your collection system? So there is probably more on this slide than I can cover in perfect detail. But as I said earlier, predominantly private haulers provide residential subscription service and commercial service. We know that the city of Canandaigua and the village of Victor provide public collection. Pricing is high for current residential services. We did not do a statistically representative survey. We did a limited sample from folks that were willing to share what they're paying for their residential curbside service in several areas of the county. And so that's the top right table. And you can see there's quite a wide range from $40 all the way up to $70, which is very expensive. Interestingly, we requested and looked at the budgeted costs for municipal service, and it is of interest that it's quite a bit less expensive, although candidly, we probably have not caught all of the capital costs of vehicle replacement. Those are probably understated. But anyway, we wanted to get this information so we could do some forecasting of what these rates, how they might be impacted. So again, I won't try to make anybody an expert on collection economics, but ultimately, if you're in the collection business, you want your garbage truck to collect from as many customers as they can in their 8 or 10-hour shift. So if that truck is going down a street or into a business district and it's tipping containers, we call that productive time. The moment that truck has to stop its route and start driving to a landfill, that's non-productive time. So there's no revenue being earned on that non-productive time. So as soon as there is no Ontario County-based solid waste facility, every single hauler incurs impaired collection economics because their non-productive time increases potentially quite significantly. And so we did this analysis of a waste export system with direct haul to the 3 closest landfills, which you can see on this map. And even with High Acres and Seneca Meadows, there will be extended drive time, so that's going to impair. We can't actually guarantee that any landfill will take the waste, although maybe it will, but I think many of you may know that Seneca Meadows landfill is also currently slated to close in the near future. So that may go away, and we'll talk about the disruption that could incur in a little bit. But essentially, if direct haul is required to surrounding landfills, that, in addition to impairing the collection systems, will incur higher tip fees, we think, because we believe that all of the small haulers and the 2 small municipalities won't have really any leverage to secure lower disposal rates. So we've actually used and assumed a little bit higher disposal rates if the county closes its landfill and does not replace that landfill with a commercial transfer station. And again, not going to tell anybody on the call that these numbers are 100% accurate down to the penny, but we believe for planning purposes and for comparative purposes, we try to share our assumptions, and we want folks to understand what the differences look like depending on how far you go in your truck. So, all right, so we've been plowing through landfill alternatives and waste export. It is important that I want to convert over and talk about recycling because Ontario County has a quite effective commercial material recovery facility, a MRF in the parlance of our industry. So let me try to blast through here some recycling economics. I think the recycling industry historically has done a poor job at being clear at the cost of recycling. It has always cost money to recycle, just like it costs money to throw trash away, because you have to collect recyclables just like you have to collect trash. And actually, you now have to process sorted or mixed recyclables to sort them out. And so just looking at modern material recovery facilities, these are quite complex industrial facilities with conveyors and robots and optical sorters. And it is expensive to process recyclables. The difference is once you sort them, you now can sell the commodities and earn revenue on the back end. But make no mistake, recycling costs money. And here's a picture of Ontario County's MRF, which is a full modern commercial MRF with all the sortation systems that you need. Okay, quick recycling economics class. The true cost of recycling, when a truck filled with mixed recyclables reaches the MRF, there is a cost to process those recyclables. And I would use a number maybe between $85 and $110 a ton. So that's the cost to dump those recyclables out, sort them into cardboard and paper and PET bottles and aluminum cans and steel cans. And that's a pretty fixed cost. Once you build your MRF, you pretty much know how much it costs per ton to process recyclables. However, when you're done sorting them, you can now get revenue by selling those commodities. But here's what gets interesting. I think folks, generally understand that, hey, aluminum is valuable and steel is valuable and cardboard is valuable. But as this slide shows, the value fluctuates with commodity markets. And so those of us in the recycling industry recognize that there are good markets and bad markets. And in the last 5 years, 1 ton of Ontario County recyclables was as low as $34.85 a ton. That's not a lot of value if it costs you $100 a ton to process. However, we also had some up markets where almost $185 a ton was the value, in which case you're making money on your $100 a ton processing. And so the point that I think is important for everybody to take away is that these dynamics will be built into future recycling contracts in Ontario County. All right, so I'm just closing in. Again, small communities in Ontario County, probably not a lot of opportunity to negotiate rates going forward. Again, with recycling, just like with the landfill, the county will need to make some decisions as to whether to continue its current MRF or possibly to export recyclables. But here's another map. This map looks at available recyclables processors in the region. And as you can see, there actually are fewer processors. Hey, everybody should be happy to know we're getting close here. We're making pretty good progress. We have a shot at staying on time. So what does all of what I've told you mean? Well, the last task that we were asked to do was to take all of the data and predictions of different options and costs and to then show the impact of those changes on all of the incorporated communities in Ontario County. And so when we look at that, we really tried to measure the financial impacts, and because we think we had the ability to predict what some of those key assumptions are. And we have built a quite sophisticated Excel spreadsheet model. I believe we have a quite long appendix in our report that shows literally town by town, city by city impacts. And I'm just going to flash a couple of slides that reflect the size and complexity of the impact analysis that we did. But our objective was to give every town, every city, every village a clear understanding financially of what these different options might look like. And so, again, I won't take the time on this call to dig into these tables, but for those of you who like numbers, you have the ability to look into these financial impacts. And all right, so that's financial impacts, but I think we all know there are other impacts that are not financial, and some of them are harder to measure, and some of them we don't even know how to measure, but they are just as critical and have just as much importance to those of you on the call who are working through different options of the landfill. So we need to look at some of these and acknowledge some of these, and I think these are critical components in this decision that the county has to make. So truck traffic. We actually requested a full year of scale data from the facility and found that over 674,000 tons of material were imported from out of county in 2023. That's almost, about 450 transfer trailers per week. And the map on the left shows the primary roadway routes that imported waste. It enters the county from the east and from the south and makes its way to the landfill. By our calculations, over 600,000 miles of roadway traffic was traversed by inbound transfer trailers. And so, hey, that's why those of you that live on those routes, we know you're feeling it, because that's exactly what the data are showing, and we wanted to get that in the conversation. So those roadway miles introduce wear and tear, and they introduce air emissions. We had some conversations with the county transportation department to work up an estimate of county expenses for roadway repairs. We came up with about $54,000 a year. And on the air emission side, we estimate roughly 1,300 tons of CO2 are being emitted within Ontario County. But in fairness, if the Ontario County landfill closes, those air emissions will not go away, because now those trailers are going to have to find another home, but those emissions will be essentially shifted out of Ontario County air, but they still will be, frankly, in New York State air. So a couple other hard to measure impacts. It was reported that there have been some visibility issues for travel on Highway 5. We know that litter and aesthetics are a problem. We don't know how to measure that, but we need to mention it. We obtained odor-related complaints from the county. I think we actually learned in our meeting last night there may be some other sources of odor information and complaints, and I regret that we didn't include that, but we want to acknowledge that that is obviously a significant issue. And we also had it brought up last night that impacts on very adjacent agricultural fields with birds and other vectors can be an issue. And we are totally here to hear those issues. We just don't know how to measure them. So if there are those of you that have those concerns and there is data that we can consider, we would love to get it. And we're trying to be as all-encompassing as we can in our considerations. So I'm going to conclude, I think, pretty quickly. So this was an extraordinarily complex research effort. And frankly, the forecasts and predictions that we have to make, we can't make those with perfection. Candidly, there could be, if Seneca Meadows landfill closes, there could be disposal shocks that are quite significant. But we think that we've met the objective of providing reliable information that you could base decisions on. But it is a complex situation with impacts varying across the county. I think a key takeaway, though, is there frankly is, if you look across the nation at how waste management is conducted, there is not very high regulation in waste management here in Ontario County. So some of the options that might increase diversion most likely will require stronger regulatory policies. And so these are maybe directions of conversation that you might want to have. With regards to next steps, obviously the next steps will depend on the decisions made in the near future, but whether it's landfill or MRF or transfer station, for the landfill, there will be expansion permitting followed by construction and building. That gets a little tricky. That's going to take a number of years. It will follow the county's procurement process. If the landfill closes, that's a lot clearer, because the current operator will then be contractually obligated to close and to perform long-term care. Same thing, again, transfer station or MRF, there the county would most likely undertake a procurement process. There still would be permitting, although much more simplified. But essentially, these are quite complex considerations. It could not be more evident to me. I'm not from Ontario County. We try to look at this with independent eyes, that there are folks that land on all sides of all these issues, but it is my sincere hope that we've been able to provide quantitative data and information, as we were charged, that can be relied upon for your community to have constructive conversations about the future of waste management in Ontario County. Thank you very much. I'm hoping I stayed close to time here. Not maybe a little over, but thank you all for your attention. And I understand there may be some curated questions, and happy to stay on for a while if folks want to do that.
Thanks so much, John. Oh, bear with us. We got a technical difficulty. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, John. Just as a reminder to our attendees, that was a very brief overview of a lot of information. That full report can be found at www.oclandfillfuture.com. And we did put that in the chat a couple times for anybody who's interested. The full report does include all of the data used to make all those tables and charts that John presented in his presentation today. There's also an opportunity on that website to communicate directly with your supervisor if you have comments or questions. There's great opportunity to submit them there. John, we got some really, really great questions in the chat today. Unfortunately, we are running really close on time. We are going to go a couple minutes past 1 o'clock to try and get to some of these questions. Any of the questions, just as a reminder, that we are not able to answer today, we will put in the frequently asked questions section on the website as well. So let's dive right in here. So we had some questions, and you may have briefly answered this, but can you just talk a little bit about how tipping fees fit into the cost of disposal for residents, like the bills that they're paying at the curbside, or if they use transfer stations?
Certainly, and that's a good question. So, when you, as a resident, subscribe for collection and you pay a hauler, and they send you a bill, the amount they're charging you has to cover the cost of their collection vehicle to deploy that vehicle out to pick up your material, and then it also has to cover the cost to dispose of whatever they're collecting. So either to deliver recyclables to process or to deliver waste. Interestingly, there's quite a lot of detail in the report that breaks down the collection cost fraction versus the disposal cost. Um, Interestingly, disposal is a relatively small portion of residential collection rates. It is a little bit larger portion of commercial rates, but that is all available in our report in terms of how we worked through that and looked into that. I think maybe the silver lining is because the rates that are currently being charged in Ontario County are quite high. The disposal portion of the current rates is fairly small, but I think it's also important to note that local haulers are going to price their services based on their knowledge of the market, and that while we can sort of technically analyze those rates, the market ultimately will set what those are. So I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, John. Also, I have great news. We did advertise this meeting going until 1:30. So we have some extra time for questions than we thought. So there was some questions relating to impacts on waste generation and New York State policies and regulations. Can you talk about any impact they may have?
Certainly. It turns out in the materials management industry, certainly state regulations are very important. And in fact, if you look around the country, we work with clients across many states throughout the US. Our industry is most certainly driven in many regards at the state level. However, because it's an operational industry, the operation of facilities and collection systems, typically is falling to a combination of private and public sector entities. And I know the question was about some state regulation, but I think it's important for folks to recognize that New York State's local governance, the fact that you have a prevalence of relatively smaller towns and villages and cities, all of whom have some responsibility, that is, while not unique to New York State, that creates just some difficulties in setting up a system that fundamentally is like a utility system. And so having scale in a utility is very important. New York State, I think, should get some kudos for establishing principles of sustainability and circularity, and taking steps, within their ability to establish, values of diverting waste from landfill. But ultimately, Ontario County citizens and businesses are essentially relying on what I would characterize as a solid waste utility that actually has to perform and operate. And so I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what a a state agency can do and set as priorities versus how an actual industry or utility operates. So I think that's maybe a little bit of a cryptic answer, but going forward, it would seem to me, drawing from best practices of other parts of the country where county materials management systems have been able to build up as larger scaled entities. I think we've seen some different different outcomes and different diversion performance, which we can maybe talk about during questions.
Okay, next question. Can you talk a little bit more about the scope of work of your contract with the Ontario County Board of Supervisors? Sort of maybe what was included and what was outside of that?
So the question is just to discuss a little bit our scope, our contractual scope. I tried to suggest this a little bit at the beginning, but we understood our charge to be um, uh, reliably compiling and quantifying data and numbers that could be used by the board and by stakeholders in the county to understand the costs and the environmental impacts and various other impacts of different alternatives were the landfill to either close or stay open. And we have tried to take that very seriously. I think those of you who've looked at the report will see it contains quite a lot of appendices and numbers. Um, but again, I would reiterate, we actually, that's where we stopped. Sometimes as consultants, we get hired to bring back recommendations. We were not asked to bring recommendations back for this project, but rather only to try our best to inform all stakeholders as fairly and transparently as we can. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Um, we're getting a lot of questions. I don't want the attendee to think we missed the question about the liner system. I think that's a really interesting, important question. It has a really technical answer. I think that I can give you a brief overview, but I think it's maybe something that would be appropriate to address in our frequently asked questions section on the website. So just briefly, so it's an engineering question, and we would really need to dig into some of the regulations from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Those regulations were updated in 2023, and there are some different requirements in regards to the liners used in the new constructed landfills. So I believe that it is possible that the DEC would require additional liners between the existing waste mast and the potential vertical expansion. And I assume that should the Board of Supervisors further explore a expansion, that's something they would need to bring on an engineering team with. And work through the permitting process as well. And if we need some more technical details, we can certainly dive into those on the website as well. Oh, this was a really interesting question, John. What is the likelihood, if there was an expansion, of the commercial viability if it was only to accept county waste? Would it be viable in that instance? That's the question.
Yeah, good question. And interestingly, at the outset of this project, I think one of the concerns was that no private landfill operator potentially would want to enter into a contract for a very small landfill that was only getting very little waste. And so I get it from that standpoint. Um, One comment that I would make is one of the services we provide to local governments and county governments all over the country is in procuring this sort of specialized service. If there is a competitive market, we feel strongly that under the right terms, it would be possible and viable to have an operator come in for a smaller landfill. The flip side is that does depend on the competitiveness of the market, which, and by competitiveness, I mean, are there private landfill operators who are qualified that are looking to, grow their business, maybe not in ways of having a huge regional facility. Um, we, our professional opinion is that if the deal is set up properly, that there would be interested operators on that. And so all this is to say that the procurement process just will need to recognize that there could be different options. And I think we would recommend that the county test, even if it makes one decision, you could still use the procurement to test different size options for that landfill, because that will, again, further inform the opportunity. This is a long-winded way of saying that we do believe that it's possible to set a procurement up that would have a smaller operating landfill operated by a qualified private entity, and that the economics could be made to work out if the deal can be done appropriately.
Great. Can you chat a little bit more about what are some of the challenges with expanding the collection and processing of food waste and other organics? We recognized in that pie chart that was a large percentage of our current waste stream.
Yeah, two comments. One is, I don't know if any of you will be able to make tonight's meeting, but we'll have some additional team members available tonight who can go into great detail on some of the organics option. So if that's available to you, again, I think, we would love to do so. But I think there are two components that make recovery and processing of food scraps challenging. And the first is simply in separating the food, storing the food until it can be collected, keeping contamination out of the food, because composting, especially, you can't tolerate a lot of contamination, and then getting sufficient volume of food scraps to then build a facility and make that capital investment and guarantee that food supply, that food supply. There is a combination of operational challenges and just business difficulties to overcome. And I think that's why we have here in this region, and we've documented in the report, there are smaller scale facilities that are able to take some food scraps. It's sort of more of a grassroots type opportunity. But scaling up food scraps diversion has proved quite expensive to both secure supply, keep it clean, and be able to process it. But again, those of you that are interested in that topic, we would love to have you attend the meeting tonight, where you have more opportunity to get additional expertise on that. We have actually a team member, Mr. Jerry Leone, who could do that. So
Great. Well, thanks for that information. Let's see. We had a question about the MRF. Um, is it becoming obsolete because, sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. Would it be better to go back to like source separated recycling? Is the equipment aging at the facility? Is the recycling coming out of that equipment too contaminated because they were all mixed together? Maybe you can just chat a little bit about that.
yeah, I would be happy to do so. There were a couple of questions kind of built in there. Just talking about source separation. Um, any materials management service has a collection component, and then what do you do with it once you've collected it? The recycling industry has definitively moved to more mixed forms of collection because that's far more efficient and productive. Um, Believe it or not, there are still a few counties and cities around the country that collect their recyclables, even residential curbside recyclables, in a multi-compartment truck that are sort of separated. Those are very, very rare. That's a very expensive and unproductive form of collection. And it really has just been, those programs have stayed because no modern MRFs have come into the region. So I think that's one consideration. And could I trouble you to repeat? There were a couple questions built in there.
Sorry. Just trying to understand the logistics of potentially transitioning from our zero sort single stream recycling where materials are mixed together is it even possible to go back to a system that's source separated?
So, so certainly anything's possible, but I think the fundamental consideration in recycling is that the industry really has reached some maturity in that we in the US used to export a lot of very dirty recyclables to other countries. And since about 2018, 2019, those countries stopped accepting very messy, contaminated recyclables. And we've really seen the industry demand close attention be paid to minimizing contamination on mixed recyclables. And I think the takeaway is it's very unlikely you would see reverting to dual stream or even source separated recyclables. I think the collection systems and the processing capabilities are there, that if there is not a lot of contamination in recyclables, the industry is well prepared to sort that material and clean it and sell it and realize value for it. And so I think with mixed recycling, it's much more a question of having methods to eliminate contamination and reduce contamination.
So we did just have a question, what percentage of zero sort recyclables are landfilled? I'll just take this one quickly. Any recyclables that are brought to the materials recovery facility here in Ontario County legally cannot be landfilled. So they are all sorted. We do like to make sure that our residents are aware that we do have a facility here in Ontario County and their materials are processed here in Ontario County. And most of those materials are actually marketed within the Northeast. So we do have a strong recycling end market here. So often our residents may have heard things in the news about other areas in the country and these sort of doomsday recycling is being landfilled. We're lucky to both have our facility and markets here. There is a small amount of waste that comes out of the materials recovery facility. It's called the residual rate. So that's if you put something in your bin that is not recyclable. We actually have a very low residual rate here in Ontario County. It's much lower than the national average. It's under 10% typically. It does vary a little bit. I believe the national average is over 20%. So we are lucky. Our residents are doing a good job recycling and we appreciate them. And all of the rest of that percentage of material is baled into their various components and they are able to be sold to markets here in the Northeast. So thank you for those follow-up questions. I hope that answered that. And we'll shift over here. Let's see. We've still got a few more minutes left. There's a couple of really good questions I still want to get to, John. One of them is, you briefly covered it in a slide. If the landfill was to close, what are the current contract provisions for the ongoing management of that site relating to leachate? How are those costs handled? How long into the future is that a responsibility?
Yep, good question. And I think a clear answer to this. The county had the wisdom in signing its operating agreement with its current operator, that the current operator is contractually obligated to cap and close the landfill according to current regulatory requirements for doing so, and is also responsible for long-term care over a period of 30 years, which would consist of monitoring the groundwater, continuing to process and monitor landfill gas, and obviously addressing any other significant waste coming out of the landfill. And I think folks, I have to say I'm not an engineer, but I think just to kind of refresh everybody on the concept of the landfill, when wastes are deposited, there's a lot of liquid. there's degradation occurring. And so the landfill, while it's active, while there's all that liquid in there, it's catching the gas and the liquid and processing it and minimizing pollution. Over a period of 30 years, the wastes that are degradable go through their degradation process, and the intent of long-term care is essentially to render the waste in the landfill no longer, actively degrading, and to essentially leave the waste inside a tomb where it's contained and does not have a significant risk of environmental problems. But the current county operator is responsible for that entire closure and 30-year post-closure phase.
Okay. And closely related to that, there was a question about leachate and how that is handled. There were some questions about PFAS in the leachate, but maybe you can just chat a little bit more about the leachate, how the leachate is handled. The PFAS stuff gets a little technical. We might want to answer that in more detail on the website.
Thanks, Caitlin. I think I'll probably also be a little bit non-technical on that. So leachate management is simply the concept whereby liquids that flow through the deposited waste in the landfill are captured and then diverted into a wastewater treatment system. PFAS, which is an acronym, PFAS, which stands for a large chemical name that I fumble every time, so I'm not going to attempt it. This is a bit of an emerging issue in the solid waste space. I think we've learned that, so these are essentially, PFAS are essentially chemicals that last a long time and just don't degrade over time and have been found to have potentially environmental impacts. So this is an issue that the industry and regulators are looking into. There's a lot of research going on. I think my understanding is that PFAS does concentrate in leachate, and so some of this issue might transfer into the wastewater treatment system. I think it's great that folks are aware of this. I would agree with you that there are some technical answers that I'm probably not qualified to give, but it's certainly something the industry is focused very closely on.
Okay, great. Thank you. We also have a question that asks about pay-as-you-throw programs. I know this is one we got at the meeting last night as well. So can you just talk about how that could potentially factor into both waste generation and the potential cost to residents for their disposal?
I can. So let me just define a couple of terms. So pay as you throw is the notion that if you generate more trash that goes to landfill, you should pay higher rates. But if you recycle more and don't have as much trash, then you should pay lower rates. So you pay more for throwing away more garbage, hence the pay as you throw. MSW consultants, as well as me professionally, we do believe in the concept of those rates, of pay as you throw rates, because they provide a sort of financial incentive for waste generators to realize that they can divert material through the recycling program, or potentially through yard waste, separated yard waste, or even potentially organics. So conceptually, this is a popular idea. It's been implemented in a variety of manners across the country. And I think it's a positive in the industry. I think a key consideration in Ontario County for a pay-as-you-throw system is that, again, this is a system that relies on the rates that customers pay to provide incentive to behave and recycle effectively. And so that means you need to have some kind of a rate-paying system, a utility system. It is more difficult to implement a pay-as-you-throw system without having essentially a utility and user fees. And so that's why there certainly are ways to go about pay-as-you-throw in Ontario County without major overhaul of how materials management is regulated. But that is essentially a significant future consideration, whether and how such a system might be implementable in Ontario County. It's just not as simple as it sounds. Great concept, but to do it properly will take some work.
Is there any impact on the recycling industry and generation with pay-as-you-throw programs?
So it's interesting. If you look at certain types of programs that go to a pay-as-you-throw program, depending on how they do that program, um, there are programs that document a reduction in waste being thrown away to landfill. Um, I'm going to be careful not to get into too many weeds here, but the two types of pay-as-you-throw systems are one that is strictly pay by the bag, and another that would be volume based on the size of garbage cart you have. We think that if you go to a garbage cart based pay as you throw system, there's not a huge change in overall generation, but you'll see a shift from waste into recycling as people try to recycle more. So we think it has the intended effect. We think a bag based pay as you throw program essentially creates incentive for some waste generators to find their closest commercial dumpster. And amazingly, waste generation goes way down in bag-based programs. It's harder for us to conclude that that's anything but some subset of people skirting the system, as well as some greater recycling. I don't mean to totally denigrate bag-based programs, but I think this is to say that it's just not a simple decision. It would take a little bit of follow-up work, but if done right, again, we think the concept is sound.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. You talked about the difficulties of siting a new waste to energy facility, also called an incinerator, and siting a new landfill due to regulations. Those are really limited in areas. Do those regulations not apply to an expansion?
I think just briefly, there are a few components of those regulations that would also apply to an expansion. And the short answer that I have for you today is we did look at limitations on expansion in our report and concluded that we don't see any clear limits to expansion. It doesn't look like. So there are some additional potential constraints. We looked at them, but those aren't as significant as building a new facility.
Okay, bear with me. We're getting quite a few questions coming in. So let me just kind of read through some of these. We have time, I think, for one or two more. Okay, so if there was an expansion at the existing landfill, and that bought more time to make decisions related to solid waste in Ontario County, could another expansion be applied for in the future?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your question. Could I have you repeat that?
That is no problem, John. You're doing a great job. Thanks for answering all these questions for us. Um, and this was a sort of a theme I think we saw last night as well. Basically, if the Board of Supervisors chose to explore an expansion at that site, and we learned in your presentation today that the amount of time that we would be able to deposit on that waste would be determined by, how much waste was coming in. So whether that bought us a decade or 25, 50 years, what happens after that? Is it possible to look at another expansion on that site?
I get it. Thank you. The quick answer is, in theory, you could go through this expansion decision process again if you expand here in the next few years and maybe go through it again. But I think though it's worth bearing in mind that at least on the current parcel, and depending on the decisions made in current expansion, at some point you would likely completely fill up the site. And I think that it is likely that if the Board of Supervisors opts to expand at whatever fill rate, whether it is filling fast and is economically, really low unit cost, or whether it converts to a more of a community-based disposal option that lasts a long, long time, Again, our engineers tried to identify the maximum readily available expansion. I think if it did ever expand in the future, you would get into wetlands and you get into some other site remediation issues that were beyond our scope on this study.
So you talked about a lot of different scenarios in your presentation, and I think we'll take this as our last question. And in the expansion ones, as well as the potential for a commercial transfer station, you talked about permitting through the New York State DEC. Can you just give us like a very brief overview of like timelines? What does one take longer than the other? How that works?
Well, Kayla, I'm going to confess that this gets a little bit out of my expertise as a non-engineer, but the feedback that I've gotten from our technical team is that when it comes to landfills, you're probably looking at a minimum 2.5, 3 years if everything goes well, with the potential to take longer if there are unforeseen issues, or if, as was suggested by one of the earlier questions about the liner system, if there is some requirement to perhaps put an intermediate liner in. So the permitting process, we're talking multiple years for landfill. I have heard, again, as a non-solid waste engineer, I've heard that new facilities, whether new landfills or new waste energy facilities, you're talking about 6, 7, 8 years for siting and permitting. So that's another significant barrier to new. If I step back to transfer stations and recycling facilities, those I again, my knowledge is that the permitting goes down a little bit for those facilities because you're not leaving waste in the ground and you're not burning anything. You're essentially, in the case of a recycling facility, handling recoverable commodities, and in the case of a transfer station, you're just repositioning waste and sending it elsewhere. So those have a little bit lower chance for environmental impacts. Hence, I believe a little bit shorter permitting time frame. That's the best I can do. I hope that, though, provides a little bit of differentiation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for walking us through some of those details. So quite a few questions in the chat are more appropriately answered by the county. There's some technical information that was requested. So we are going to post that on the website. I apologize. We had a lot of questions coming in fast and furious. I apologize if we missed your question again. We will get to those on the website. The full report can be viewed again at the www.oclandfillfuture.org. And included in that report, and I think this may answer a few of the questions, are a number of appendices that have all of the data that sort of helped to inform the conclusions made in the report. So please take a few minutes to look at that if you're interested, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible on the frequently asked questions section on the website. So again, thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future.